Hi, my name is Wayne, and this is Type Tested. Recently, I've been working on cleaning up this Royal number 10 here, and in the process of trying to clean out these links down here, I've removed the type rest and captured all the type bars up. And it occurred to me that this represented a really good opportunity to discuss the Royal ribbon feed and reverse system. Now, this particular system applies to the Royal 10, the KHM, the KMM, and the HH typewriters. Just the big standards. This does not apply to the Royal number 1, the Royal number 5, or to the Royal Portables. They used a different mechanism that's much more reminiscent of what you'd find on an Underwood or a Smith Corona. However, because it's such a unique system, and in its own way kind of clever, I thought it was worth taking time to examine. So let me start by just reviewing how the ribbon is set up. Now, unlike the Smith Coronas, you'll notice that the ribbon feed is off of this end of the spool and not that end of the spool. So it spins this way and feeds over to this spool here. So it comes off the front, goes through the ribbon guide, over, under, over, and then goes back into the other side. Now, to get the ribbon out, you have this little door here to open to allow you to grab it. It just simply pulls up and there you go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this camera off of its mount and I'm going to show you how the ribbon feed is actually driven on this particular typewriter. So let me pull the carriage over here. And you can see that there is a gear on the spring barrel here. Now this is unusual. Usually the ribbon or the carriage is driven simply by the escape wheel and the pinion and the rack. That's what controls whether or not things advance. So a gear on the spring barrel is unnecessary, but there's a reason it's there. Now let me tip this up. If I can do so without interfering with the camera. And I will show you that you can see here, there's a gear, a pinion gear right there, that is meshed with the gear on the ribbon, on the mainspring. And you can see the drawband wrapped around the ribbon, the main spring barrel there. And there's a little bit too much oil there, but I was trying to deal with a little rust, so I'll have to take care of that. Like I said, I'm still in the process of cleaning this. Now that gear is attached to a rod here, a shaft. That moves forward, and that's what actually drives the ribbon. So let me put this typewriter back down. Put the camera back on its stand, and I can show you more about what that is connected to. So let me take this spool off, temporarily move it over here. So you can see here, this is the shaft that I was talking about on the underside. And you can also see that it is attached to a worm gear right here, which is meshed with a sprocket gear right here. You zoom in so you can see that. So here's the sprocket gear. Move this a little bit so it's a little easier to see. So there's the sprocket gear. This is linked to this shaft here, which has the ribbon spool resting on top of it. The spool has these two little notches underneath it that grab into this funny looking gear here. That actually turn the ribbon spool. So as you type, each time you move the carriage, as the carriage moves, it's kind of hard to see, but each time the carriage moves, the ribbon will move as well. So if I hit the carriage release and I start to draw it, you can see the spool turning. And that is because the ribbon drive is attached to the mainspring through that shaft here. So this advances whether or not you hit a letter. It advances on the space, it advances in the tab, it advances on the carriage release. Anytime the carriage advances, the ribbon advances. That is one disadvantage of this system, that it spins the ribbon through more than it needs to. However, it's a very reliable system. The other disadvantage of this is that if there's a problem in the ribbon drive, it also will lock up the carriage. So that is one thing that you have to pay attention to, that in this particular case, because they're linked together, a ribbon drive problem can manifest as a carriage advance problem. Now, let me discuss the ribbon reverse on this, because this is also another interesting aspect of this system. You'll notice on the bottom of this spool, there is this tab here. Now, it's currently restrained, and I will show you why. So let me put this in the free spool. And that's one nice thing I like about the Royals, is that you can hold this here and wind the ribbon by hand. And now you see that this tab, now that it's reached the end of the spool, this tab has dropped down. And it does so because of this torsion spring here. That tab is attached to this little projection up here, this other tab. And this is what is called an interference system in terms of the ribbon reverse. Now, the way you put this ribbon onto the spool, you have the usual little spade hook here, and you have this other tab here, which is kind of used to restrain the ribbon and keep it from coming off of that hook accidentally. Now, on this particular ribbon, by way of trying to keep as much as possible, I've cut a little bit off of a standard ribbon with an eyelet in it. Now, this is not needed for this system. The reason I cut a bit off of it is to keep it from being able to get up into the type guide. So really, you could cut it immediately before that and you're just fine. But if you don't cut it, then this eyelet is going to get caught in the type guide before the ribbon has a chance to reverse, and the ribbon reverse is not going to work right. Now, as I said, this system does not apply to the earlier Royals because they did not have an automatic ribbon reverse. It was simply a manual system. Now, as you'll note, when we wrap up this ribbon and go beyond a certain point, the ribbon will catch this tab here and will pull the tab on the bottom back up and hold it there. So when the ribbon reaches the end and we unwind from the spool, that tab will be released, the torsion spring will pull it down, and that will drop below the table on the ribbon spool. That is what actually accomplishes the reverse. Like I said, it's an interference system. So when this tab drops down, what it does is it pushes up against this lever here and pulls it out. This lever is attached to a roller down here. It's right there. So let me zoom in so you can see that. There we go. So there's the roller here, and you can see that as I move that, the roller moves forward and back. And that is what actually activates the reverse mechanism. This is not the reverse mechanism itself. This is just a lever. The reverse mechanism itself is handled by this snail cam here. Now, if I move the carriage, put the ribbon back on here, and wind it up a bit so that it's not going to trip. As I move the carriage, you can see the snail cam turn over. When the ribbon reverse mechanism operates, it will push that roller so that it is in the way of the snail cam. Now, in this particular case, the ribbon is feeding the other direction, so it's not the bottom one that's going to actuate. It is the top one, which is being pushed by a similar arm on the other side. And let me show you that. Zoom out here, and then I'm going to lift this ribbon spool out temporarily, and I'm going to take this cover off so that I can show you what is underneath it. Now, there are 3 screws. This one here, this one here, and then there's one under the spool here that is retained by a little rubber, paper, whatever kind of ring underneath it. Now, usually. Where did that go? I'll have to find that later. So now that I have that off, you can see the other lever here. This lever is attached to this little crossbar here. Zoom in again so you can see that. It's attached to this crossbar here, which then goes over here. And you can see that it's operating this bar here. Move the ribbon spools, which then moves this bar here, which operates the position of the upper roller. So let me go ahead and advance the snail cam just a bit. You can see that as this moves forwards, it moves over the cam. And what happens is that as the carriage moves and this lever on the other side is depressed, it moves the cam in front of that, it moves this roller in front of that snail cam. Then as the typewriter, as the carriage advances, it will push this worm gear off of this gear and mesh in with that gear there. So there's the gear that is attached to the cross shaft to drive the other side. There's the gear that's attached to this spindle to drive this side. Now, when you put the typewriter in freewheel, what it does is just simply disengages that worm gear so that you can turn both spools freely. And it does that simply by taking the ribbon select lever and holding it in the center position. That's all that happens. But this is a nice system to allow you to wind and unwind ribbons in order to change them that I kind of wish other typewriters had. So let me go ahead and put the ribbon spools back on. And then what I will do is I'll set the ribbon drive so that it is feeding off of the right-hand spool. So that means that the cross shaft is engaged. And I will move the carriage back and forth a few times. Okay. And you can see that as the ribbon unspools here, it's got 2 layers left. Okay, it's almost there, so let me use the space bar here. Okay, so now, as I move the space bar, this is the tab to guide the ribbon and retain it. That's not the reverse tab. That's on the other side of the spool. So let me do this a few more times. And we will begin to see. All right, so the reversing tab is right here. Let's see if I can get a good picture of it. So you can kind of see it through the hole in the spool here. So as I advance, you can see that it's releasing. So it's fully released. Now let me move the camera again here so you can see the rollers and the worm gear. All right. It is now see if I can show this. Let me pull the camera off of its stand. This will make it easier. Okay. So as I move the space bar, you can see the tab drop down, starting to push against the reverse arm. And it is going to move the bottom roller into position. And that is going to push the drive arm with the worm gear upward. Let's see if I can hold the camera and this at the same time. So here we go. So you can see the roller moving. It's initially blocked by the position of the cam, but once the cam moves to a neutral position, the roller goes past the cam, and you will notice in a moment, you can see the worm gear here starting to move. And now it has switched, and the ribbon starts moving the other direction. That is how the automatic ribbon reverse works on a Royal typewriter. You'll notice that it's a chain of events that is kicked off by the little tab underneath the ribbon spool. This is why you must have the correct ribbon spool on a Royal in order for that mechanism to operate correctly. If you try to put a Smith Corona style spool onto this typewriter, you will have to reverse the ribbon yourself. The trip mechanism is not going to work. Both of these rollers will simply be held away from the ribbon drive arm. So the last thing to note here is that as the ribbon spools up, it will once again grab that tab, pull it up and away from the lever arm there. Like I said, this is called an interference system because that tab, as it drops down, interferes with this lever, which then pushes it and actuates the overall system. And you'll find that there's some other typewriters that work a similar way where there's a lever, and this is something that you'll find on the torpedo typewriters, that there's a lever in here that when it advances so far, that's what will actually trip the ribbon reverse. Now those are kind of delicate because if the arm is bent a little bit one way or the other, it's not going to function quite correctly. It'll reverse too quickly and you won't get full use of ribbon, or it won't reverse at all and you'll simply run to the end of the spool and have to do it manually. This is a little more foolproof, but it also means that you have to, that because it's dependent on the ribbon spools, you have to have a spool with additional complication rather than simply two pieces of metal sandwiched together to hold the ribbon. So in this sense, the Smith Corona style system is much more effective. It works better, it's easier to maintain, and it's independent of the carriage so that you don't have to deal with the problem of having one jam up the other. That's really what I want to show today. Just a thorough example of the Royal Ribbon feed and reverse system on the big Royal Standard typewriters. So this is a Royal 10. Again, it's on the KMM, the KHM, the HH, all of the big desktop Royals. So once again, my name is Wayne, and this is Type Tested.